So welcome to this short lecture video. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what are the costs of inflation. We talk about inflation so much. What is the big deal about having inflation? Well, in our previous discussion, we already encountered the notion that inflation is related to expectations. In other words, what people believe is going to happen with prices in the future. And if people miscalculate, then can lead to unexpected redistribution of wealth. Why is that a bad thing? Because that means wealth is going from one person in the economy to another, and that transfer has nothing to do with goods and services or people being smart or being able to come up with creative ideas that contribute to society. It's simply a matter of miscalculating what's going to happen with prices. So that's one example of a negative effect of inflation, or perhaps an unwanted effect, not so negative. There are other more serious negative effects with the economy that not as in this example is a transfer. Somebody is going to be happier, somebody is going to be hurt by this. In our previous example, having higher inflation than anticipated will be bad for workers, good for the employer. So one is hurt, the other one is happy. There are like overall costs where nobody's happy and everybody's hurt. And those what we're going to discuss. The first one is what we call menu costs. Okay, menu costs, as you can see from this example, refers to the fact that if prices are changing rapidly, there are costs that business have to incur in order to changing prices constantly. And this example kind of illustrates that sometimes restaurants will resort to kind of a creative way of reducing this by not printing new menus. But that's kind of like where the term menu costs come from, where restaurants just strike the old price and put a new price below, rather than having to pay the cost of printing new menus. Now, in modern economies, examples of menu costs can be more complex. One example we discussed previously is labor disputes. Like when you have prices changing rapidly, that means wages are going to have to be changing rapidly. And if wages are changing rapidly, there'll be more strikes, more labor negotiation that leads to disruptions in the economy. Maybe you've heard about the strikes in the port of Vancouver. Workers are going on strike because labor negotiations are taking time. Goods and services are not flowing through the port. That creates a negative effect on the rest of the economy. Nobody benefits from that. It's just a cost associated with rapidly changing prices. Another example is what economists refer to as shoe leather cost, which refers to the idea that you have to make more trips to the bank. And so that's going to wear off the leather off your boots, so to speak. It's a bit of a silly term, but essentially refers to the costs associated, financial costs associated with higher inflation. If higher inflation environments, you may have to go to a bank several times. Okay. Now, to illustrate this, it's helpful to think about, some of you guys may be fortunate enough to always live in relatively low inflation environments, but if you come from Argentina like me, you've lived in high inflation environments. Those are referred to as hyperinflation. So here we see an example from Weimar Republic in post-World War I in Germany, where basically workers had to be paid twice a day. Here we see a man carrying a wheelbarrow full of cash. That may seem this man is super wealthy. That was probably like, paying wages for two workers. Workers have to go with suitcases to get paid. And right as soon as you get paid, you have to run to the supermarket and spend all that money, because if you wait until the afternoon, the purchasing power of that money will go away in half or be all gone. Okay, so these are other manifestations of this idea of shoe leather costs, which essentially means you have to do more transactions more quickly, have to run to the store as soon as you get paid, things like that. Another example is the hyperinflation from Zimbabwe. Shops only accepted checks if the customer wrote double the amount, because by the time they cashed the check, probably what they sold the good for was going to lose half of its value. And you see this kind of funny example of a billionaire starving. It's not funny, it's tragical, but in a way comical, that people are billionaires because 3x costs 100 billion, of the local currency. But as I said earlier, the value of the price doesn't mean anything. What matters is the relative prices, so how much the X cost relative to the wage you're earning. Okay. Some examples of hyperinflation to give you an idea of how out of hand things can get in the extreme. if you're fortunate enough, you'll never get to experience through this. I did get to experience this in Argentina in '89. It's very costly for society to go through this. Like the most extreme example is Hungary after World War II, where essentially every 16 hours prices double, which means you get paid, you wait 16 hours, the purchasing power of your wage goes down in half. Zimbabwe, we mentioned, took about a day for prices to halve. You see the inflation rates by month are astronomical. People typically measure inflation by day in these high inflation environments. You have Yugoslavia after the war. You see most of the time these examples are after wars. Later in the course we'll discuss some of the causes of inflation, and we'll discuss why is it that economies tend to go into inflation after war. It obviously has to do with war spending, and we'll get more into that later. And then also Germany, as we mentioned, the Weimar Republic after World War I, where inflation was more moderate, but it was about 20% per day. Now, we saw inflation has cost, but also deflation, which is the percentage decrease in prices, also can have costs. As we discussed before, in the case of inflation, it can also lead to unexpected redistribution of wealth, but it can also have other costs. And the most important cost is the fact that if people anticipate prices to go down, then they're likely to say, hey, if this is going to be cheaper tomorrow, why buy it today? I'm going to buy it tomorrow. And that leads to a reduction in spending. And that reduction in spending can actually lead to prices to deflate because businesses have less customers. And so when deflation leads to a reduction in spending, that can be very dangerous to the economy, which can lead to a recession. An example of this was the Great Depression of the 1930s that we discussed at the beginning of the course. And so deflation is also bad for the economy. And so what we really want in a modern economy is to have price stability, that prices are not swinging widely either up or down, but that there is predictability in the future of what the price level is going to be. Modern version of this, rather than price stability, is what is called inflation targeting, where governments set up a target of about 2% per year inflation. The reason why they want to be at 2%, among others, is that they want to be away from the possibility of having deflation, which can lead the economy into a recessionary trap, as we discussed a moment ago. So this is essentially one of the primary goals of the Federal Reserve, or the Central Bank of Canada, and most central banks, is to keep price stability and predictability.